Hey there, this is Jeff Johnson. I'm AARP Florida State Director, and I want to thank you for joining us today and participating in this live Tele-Town Hall. With the voter registration deadline for the general election just a week away on October 7th, we want to make sure you know how to cast your ballot in this important election. I want to stress again that the word how, because we're not here today to tell you who to vote for. We're here to make sure that you have the information you need to be able to cast your ballot. And you can find out more information on the where, when, and how to vote by visiting our state election guide at aarp.org/flvote. Now, in a minute, we're going to be joined by a Florida elections expert, Mark S. Earley, who is the Supervisor of Elections in Leon County. Since this is a Tele-Town Hall, you'll be able to ask Supervisor Earley any questions that you have about how to cast your ballot, regardless of where in the state you live. To ask a question, all you need to do is press *3 on your telephone keypad. After you press *3, you'll be connected to one of our screeners who will take your name and your question so you can ask it live on the call. So press *3 as soon as possible if you have a question for the supervisor. And let me just say, this is an event that we had scheduled prior to Hurricane Helene, and we recognize that here in the state of Florida, many people's lives have been upended by this hurricane, and it will affect the upcoming election, and we want to make sure we are able to answer any questions that we can about casting your ballot in the midst of hurricane recovery. But we also know that's not the only thing that many of you are worried about. AARP does have a lot of resources to help people recover from disasters, and particularly to stay safe from frauds and scams that may be out there after a disaster. And you can find those at aarp.org/FL or aarp.org/FL disaster help. There's everything from hotlines for state agencies who can provide you assistance to videos about how to use a chainsaw or a generator safely to, again, how to avoid frauds and scams. So again, aarp.org/FL is a great resource for those of you who are recovering from Hurricane Helene. And today, again, we're going to focus primarily on getting ready for the general election with the voter registration deadline coming up in just a week. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, AARP is in your corner, fighting for issues that matter to you, including protecting your hard-earned Social Security and achieving common sense solutions that will help Florida's family caregivers save time and money and provide them with more support. And we know that voters 50 and older decide elections, and that they are the majority of voters in every election. The Florida general election is your opportunity to make your voice heard. So again, we're here today to make sure you have the information that you need to be able to cast your ballot. Joining us now is one of the people responsible for administering our state's elections, Mark S. Earley, Leon County's Supervisor of Elections. Mark Earley has been working in service to the voters of Leon County for over 30 years. He was first elected as Supervisor of Elections in 2016 after his mentor, former Supervisor Ian Sancho, retired. Mark is responsible for the conduct of elections in Leon County and works closely with other local, state, and federal agencies to protect the right of every voter to cast their ballot and have it counted accurately and securely. During his years of service, Mark has been integral to the development of new election systems, processes, and standards that have become the norm across Florida and the nation, including a lead role in developing a post-election audit system, which provides an unprecedented level of transparency, security, and validation for elections. He was inducted into the Election Center's National Hall of Fame in August of 2023. Thank you for joining us, Mark.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here, and it looks like we've got a very good audience, so happy for the opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. And again, if you're just joining us, this is an AARP telephone town hall on the when, where, and how to vote in Florida. We're joined by Mark Earley, who's the Leon County Supervisor of Elections, and this is an interactive call, so we would love to hear from you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *3. That's the star button and the 3 button on your telephone keypad so that you can be connected with an AARP staff member who will take down your name and your question. And again, the sooner you press *3, the sooner we'll be able to get you online with our guest today. So let's get started. For close to 40 years, AARP has been working hard during elections to provide information to our members and the public on when, where, and how to vote and the candidates' positions on our policy priorities. It's important to note that AARP does not endorse candidates or elected officials. We don't give money to PACs or political action committees, nor to candidates or elected officials, and we don't tell you who to vote for. But what we do is raise visibility about issues that matter to people who are 50 and older, working across political lines, and we inform candidates of issues that matter most to people 50 and over. And then we provide factual information on when, where, and how to vote, which is what we're here today to do. Again, if you have questions for the supervisor, it's *3 on the telephone keypad, but we're going to do something else with your phone keypad right now, because Mark and I would love to get a better picture of who we have joining us today. It looks like we have a lot of folks on the call. So I'm going to ask you if you could take a quick poll question on your phone. Just listen to all 3 answers before responding. And the question is, how do you plan to vote in the upcoming election? Is it voting by mail? Is it early voting at an in-person location? Or do you plan to vote in person at a polling location on Election Day? If you plan to vote by mail, press 1 on your telephone keypad. So that's 1 if you plan to vote by mail. It's if you plan to vote at an early voting site at an in-person location, press 2 on your telephone keypad. And then press 3 on your keypad if you plan to vote in person on Election Day. So it's 1 if you're voting by mail, 2 if you're doing early voting in person, and 3 if you're voting at a polling place on Election Day. And we'll come back and share the results of this poll shortly. But in the meantime, I'd like to give Mark an opportunity to say a few words. Mark, this has to be, even before the hurricane, a really busy and critical time for your office. Thanks for joining us. Are there things you want to share with this group?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, this is definitely a very busy time. Right now is when we are in our final stages of planning. It's also when we begin sending out our big first mail-outs of vote-by-mail ballots. There's been some statutory changes, which we'll go into later, but we get a big quantity of vote-by-mail requests in that we send out in a window, and that window opened up on the 26th of September and closes on October 3rd. And with the disruption of the hurricane, that really altered some of the plans there. So we're working with the Postal Service and the Secretary of State's office very closely, especially the counties that have been impacted. But our Association of State Supervisors of Elections works very closely together to ensure everyone has the resources and we can get the communication out to the voters. And that's one of the great opportunities I think being on this program today allows us.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mark. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have questions for Mark, and you don't have to be a Leon County resident. He's well connected to his colleagues across the state. So if you're a voter anywhere in the state of Florida, you have questions about how you can cast your ballot in this election, press *3 on your telephone keypad so that we can get you in the queue and we can get Mark your question. Before we go, and I see a couple of callers already in there, so please do join. But before we go to our first caller, I was going to ask, Mark, if you could share some insights into the measures that the Florida Department of State has in place to ensure the integrity and the security of our elections.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we have a lot of questions from voters about this. And let me say that, first of all, Florida is kind of ahead of the game when it comes to having really good election laws. A lot of that stemmed from the 2000 election. A lot of the folks on this call, I'm sure, remember that election. That was my 14th year of working elections, and that big statewide recount for president, it uncovered some weaknesses in our Florida statutes. Since then, I think we've absolutely become a leader in the nation in making sure that we have very thorough testing, very strict chain of custody surrounding elections and the movement of materials and voted ballots and unvoted ballots, and all of our logs that make sure that only the right people are touching and have access to some of the important materials behind elections. We have very strong post-election audits. I'm proud to say in Leon County we championed that original concept here, where we actually have essentially two voting systems. We have an audit system, which is certified by the state and used in other states as a voting system. But we also have our main vote tabulation systems, which voters are used to. We use paper ballots, which are the gold standard, to have the voter mark on a permanent artifice their choice. And we can always refer back to that piece of paper. Folks might remember touchscreens for a while, which didn't have good records of what the voter really intended to do. But our audits can validate the election results. And really the biggest part of this is transparency. Florida is very transparent about every step of elections. All of our canvassing board meetings are open to the public. All of our voting system testing, both before and after election, are open up to the public. All of our audit processes and any recounts that we might have to do, that's all open to the public, and we always encourage voters to come in and see what we're doing. And there'll likely be some questions about vote by mail and all of that, and I can go into those details a little later.
Yeah, that sounds good. And in fact, let's go to one of those right now. Again, if you have a question for Supervisor Earley, it's *3 on your telephone keypad to get in the queue. Our first caller looks like is Donna from Palm Coast. Donna, you're on the line.
Yes, I was just wondering if you wanted to vote by mail, which we've never done. Do you mail that to our address for us to fill out the form? How do we do that?
Yes, so that's a great question. When it comes to vote by mail, there's three ways to first you have to request a vote by mail ballot. We have to validate that you are a registered voter in our county, and this is done on a county by county basis. And then you have to tell us what address you want that vote by mail ballot sent to. So you can register for request a vote by mail ballot online, and you would have to do that. You would have to include your driver's license and last four of your Social Security. You can request a vote by mail ballot request form, which is an official state form. Fill that out, sign it, and mail it back to us. Or you can come into one of your local elections office and request a vote by mail ballot in person. And you can also request a vote by mail ballot to be delivered by your designee. So we can either mail these out or give them to someone in their hands, and they can that might be the voter themselves or a relative, and they can take them to the voter and fill it out. And then you can either mail it in back to our office, or you can drop it off in person, either back at the elections office or during the early voting period. We have secure ballot intake stations at all early voting sites across the state. And those are a very, very secure way to return your vote by mail ballot to the elections office. Those are staffed, and they go right back into the hands of our county election official staff to be brought back in instead of having to find their way back through the mail stream. Does that answer the question?
I think so, but I'm going to follow up too, because what I heard Donna say was she's never voted by mail before, and she wanted to know how to request it. So it sounded like what you said is there are at least three options to request. You can do it online with your last four of your social and your driver's license number. You can request a form to fill out and send in. And is that something where you could call the local supervisor's office and get them to send you that form?
Absolutely, yes. We've all staffed up. There's lots of people ready to take those calls, and we get lots of calls requesting the form, and we can just mail it right out to you.
Awesome.
The sooner you do that, the better.
And you could also go to a supervisor's office and ask for that form as well. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, you can do it right there at the counter, and at this point, they'll probably just go ahead and give you the ballot in the return envelope and all that as you request it.
Oh, because we're already at that point. That makes sense. And I should say, too, for those who are concerned that they may not know where their local supervisor of elections office is, you can look that up online. If you go to AARP.org/FLVote, we've got that information there, but certainly you can also do a search and come up with that as well. And then, as you were saying about returning ballots, you can do that through the mail, or you can bring them to an early voting site, or bring them to the supervisor site if you would rather not rely on the U.S. Postal Service to return them. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. And two last points. If you want to request a vote by mail ballot be sent to your home through the mail, you need to do that by October 24th. There is a deadline to request it to be mailed. That way it gives time for the ballot to get to the voter and be returned through the mail back to our office. But But regardless of how you choose to vote by mail and how you return that, it has to be in our hands by the end of the day on November 5th, which is 7 p.m. on November 5th, or we cannot count them.
God, oh, really good point. Hey, I know we've got folks who are still joining the call. We did a poll earlier. You're welcome to participate as well. If you're planning to vote by mail, press 1 on your keypad. If you're planning to vote at an early voting in-person site, press 2. And if you're planning to vote in person on Election Day, press 3. I'm going to give folks a chance to vote on that if they didn't get to. I want to thank Donna for the call. And we do have a lot of folks clearly who are interested in voting by mail. Our next caller looks like Teresa from Oldsmar. Teresa, you've got a question about vote by mail ballots as well. Is that right?
Yes, it is, sir. I do it just as an extra protection in case something happens, and I know I can't get to my place. But as a secondary, it gives me all of what I'll be voting on other than just the presidency to do my homework on these people. Now, if I've gotten it mailed to me and I show up in person and I haven't mailed it, will they have some direction or say, we see you've registered by mail, turn in your register by mail form to me so you can go on into your little cubicle and vote?
Teresa, yeah, that's a great question. I always refer to vote by mail voting as really an insurance policy for your vote, exactly the way you phrased it there. You've got that in your pocket, and you can use it if the need arises. But you can still always vote in person as long as you have not sent that vote by mail ballot in. So if you want to vote in person and you had a vote by mail ballot sent, you do not have to take that vote by mail ballot to the poll with you, either an early voting site or Election Day. You can leave that at home if you like, okay? But they will see that you requested it. They'll ask you a question probably about that, but they can also tell the poll workers whether the elections office has received your vote by mail ballot. So if they have, you can't vote in person. If they have not received it, you can vote in person, and that will void the vote by mail ballot, even if it's already in the mail stream and hasn't been received by the elections office. So just go in. If you want to vote in person and you've received a vote by mail ballot, you can still go in and vote in person, and there should be really no problems with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Teresa mentioned that she uses the ballot as a way to kind of study up, which I think is a great tool. My experiences over the last couple of years, it seems as though supervisors of elections have done a lot more to help voters prepare. I know as long as I've been here, I've been in Florida about 25 years, that we'll receive a sample ballot in the mail, but I've noticed that in recent years we've started to get those by email as well. Are there other is that something that every county does, or is it kind of depend county by county how folks do that?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great follow-up. And I love the phrase that Teresa used, doing her homework. I hate to tell voters that, you have some responsibility here to do your homework, but yeah, absolutely use that resource. There have been some statutory changes. Like I say, Florida's kind of in the lead on this. We are now allowed and we are required to send out a sample ballot, but we also, all the supervisors I know of, deliver those through the email. And email is a great resource, not only for getting sample ballots, but you can track your vote by mail ballot process as it's coming to you and being sent back to the office. All of that can be tracked in most counties, not all yet, through something called ballot tracks, and that's usually communicated through email too. So it's a great way to do business with your elections office.
Excellent. And again, it's *3 on your telephone keypad in order to ask a question. You mentioned, too, that ballot tracking, and I have to say, as somebody who votes by mail, usually I will get the mail-in ballot and take it to the supervisor's office to hand deliver it. But I love that you can go online and verify that it's been received and been counted by your local supervisor. So it's great to hear that many counties have that opportunity. We've got a question in the queue. Happy to have more, so hit *3 if you've got a question. Our next one looks like it is from Daslin. Daslin, you're on the line. Oh, are you there? Okay, we may have lost Daslin. Sorry about that. If you still have a question, go ahead and press *3 again. We'll get you back in the queue. So apologies for that. I do have a question, though. I know you mentioned that that the ballots or paper ballots in Leon County that we've kind of, and I think across the state that we've moved away from the touch screen. My question is, if somebody has vision problems or otherwise has a disability that prevents them from being able to use a paper ballot, are there options available for that person?
Absolutely. Very good question. Every county is required to have an ADA accessible voting device at every polling location, whether that's early voting, in our office, or at the election day polling sites. Oftentimes they do use a touchscreen interface with an audio capability. So if you cannot see the screen but you have difficulty using your hands, you can use a pure audio ballot, and we've got an ADA interface that allows you to move up and down through the ballot. It'll all be auditory with ways to communicate. You can either, if you can use your hands but can't see the screen, you can touch various buttons on that ADA interface, or you can use a sip and puff mechanism. So there's a lot of capabilities there. The ballot will be read back to you. Your choices will be read back to you, but eventually it will mark a paper version of the ballot that can then also still be rescanned so that you can validate that the paper has the same choices that you intended it to. So even through the ADA interface, we do have that paper ballot as the official record of your votes cast. But every polling site has those.
Great. Oh, that's super helpful. Hey, we had a question from somebody in Steinhatchee that unfortunately we lost, but I wanted to make sure that we raised it. And again, we've got other folks in the queue, so *3 if you've got a question. And that is, how do you vote in the aftermath of a hurricane? Do we know at this point? I know that up and down the Gulf Coast of Florida, you're hearing about schools that are going to be offline for a long time, or other polling places that may not be operational. What is the process for you, Mark, as a supervisor of elections, to figure out how to conduct an election when a hurricane has changed, in some cases, literally the map?
Yeah, well, let me say first, unfortunately, Florida is very experienced at this. The main thing is let me say this also. Our elections offices are currently in the process of evaluating the in-person voting locations to see if they're still standing, what kind of repairs might need to be made, and making that assessment so we can work jointly with the Secretary of State and neighboring supervisors of elections to make sure everyone has the resources they need. But from a voter's perspective, let me talk first about vote by mail. If you had intended to vote in person but now have been displaced, and maybe even living in a different state temporarily, call your elections office or go online and request a vote-by-mail ballot, and make sure they have your current address where you're temporarily residing or being sheltered. And we can send the vote-by-mail ballot to that address for you. That holds true if you've requested a vote-by-mail ballot, maybe to be sent to your home, but you're not at home, or your home has been destroyed, or your mailbox is destroyed. You can let us know where you currently can receive mail, and we will send your vote-by-mail ballot to that location. If that's a second vote-by-mail ballot, your first one will be voided, and the second one is the one that will be counted. So don't worry about it being lost in the mail and somebody else getting it and things like that. We check the signatures on those very carefully. Everyone's trained. So the vote-by-mail is a great option if you were really displaced a long way out of your county or something like that. And that holds for some of the first responders, or the folks that are out there helping the local citizens in the communities. They are oftentimes displaced during an election too, and so they can request a vote-by-mail ballot be sent to wherever they are located, whether it be a camp or what have you. As far as in-person voting, like I say, the assessments are still being made. There could easily be some changes to the normal voting locations, both election day and at early voting sites. So really pay attention to communications either through media or social media, or directly on a Supervisor of Elections website that will definitely communicate that information out to voters. And but give them time to make those assessments. And there's several counties that have asked for flexibility, like we always do in the aftermath of these hurricanes, flexibility from the Secretary of State's office to open up something more along the lines of vote centers or something like that as required if there's a lot of devastation and many polling sites are impacted.
Mm-hmm. Really good point. And you mentioned in terms of even absent a hurricane, sometimes polling places change over time, I know, and so it's always important for people to check their voter registration card to see what their polling place is. But especially in this time where things may be upset and that polling place may not be operational, it's a really good point to check in with media, to check in with the website. And you mentioned social media too, but just want to flag. So if you want to make sure that you're tracking accurate information and hearing it straight from the horse's mouth. So do the supervisors of elections generally put out information through their county government social media? Do they have their own social media? Do you I assume you send out releases to local TV and radio and newspapers so that they can share that information as well, just so people are looking not just at a friend of a friend of a friend who said that the polling place changed, but somebody who's got the official word?
That's a wonderful question, yes. Please don't rely on a friend of a friend of a friend. That is really how a lot of this misinformation gets out there and starts spreading like wildfire in social media. Your trusted sources of information are the local county supervisors of elections. You can do a search online if you haven't visited their websites before, but those are the folks that have the reliable information. I think we all at this point have a Facebook page, and some counties use Instagram or Twitter, or now X, whatever the new name for that is, to communicate these changes and updates. So make sure that you are connected to official sources of information. If you hear something that seems a little outrageous or says that you aren't going to be able to vote, verify that by checking with the official sources, because likely it's not true. I know AARP has some very good resources for voters. That's a very good thing. And I would say that they are basically a trusted source. League of Women Voters is another good one. So make sure you vet your information and it's coming from someone trustworthy.
Yeah, thank you. And Mark, having been doing this as long as you have, that it seems like every election there'll be some crazy rumor about the election day changing or something like that that's been done, frankly, I think for purposes of trying to get people not to vote. And so it can't underscore enough the importance of going to the folks who are the experts on this. In addition to that, in addition to making sure that you've got the information about the where to vote, are there other things that you think that voters should be doing to prepare for this election or any election?
Absolutely, yeah. One of the big things is, the ballot. It's a complicated ballot. Statewide, we have 6 constitutional amendments. Oftentimes, the wording on those constitutional amendments can be somewhat unclear because it's a bit of legalese. So do your homework. Someone earlier on mentioned doing your homework. That's exactly right. We send out sample ballots. You can look online and see your sample ballot and research the different amendments. Research the candidates. All counties have a campaign finance resource online, so you can see who is funding your candidate, the various candidates' campaigns. So you can learn a lot about what your best option might be to vote by really doing your homework ahead of time. And that's doubly important because the ballot is so long. If you wait and don't see your ballot until you're in that privacy booth or cubicle to mark your ballot, and that's when you first start reading it, it might take you 10, 15, 20 minutes just to get through the whole thing. And that causes lines and things like that. So, do yourself a favor, do your neighbors a favor. Get out there online and research the issues on the ballot and look at the sample ballots.
Great. And I should say on AARP's behalf, we've got a lot of good information about the mechanics of where to vote, how to vote, those sorts of things. We don't have the information about candidates especially once you get into like the local offices like supervisor for elections, or well, actually, yeah, you guys sometimes are up, or judges, or school boards, those sorts of things. I suspect that you all don't carry that information either. I don't know if there's any advice that you have for voters in terms of where to go. I liked your point about go straight to the source, go see what the candidates' websites say about them, that sort of thing. Anything else you'd throw out there?
Yeah, you're right that supervisors of elections tend not to have any specific information or candidate bios, things like that. But we do oftentimes, like my website, leonvotes.gov. And frankly, even no matter where you are in the state, you can go there and see some of our links to the League of Women Voters or the James Madison, I believe it's the James Madison Institute, where they have researched some of the constitutional amendments and have thoughts on that. Also, there may be charter amendments for either your county or your local city. I know the city of Tallahassee, I think, has 5 charter amendments on the ballot this year. So there are sources for information, and people have provided thoughts on how they think those amendments might impact voters. So yeah, get out there, search around. Oftentimes, our office websites have links to those other secondary sources that we deem to be somewhat nonpartisan and trustworthy.
Awesome. That's a great tip. Hey, folks, if you have questions for Supervisor Earley, it's *3 on your telephone keypad. And one question that I have heard from people over the last couple of months that I just wanted to get your thoughts on, and it's around vote by mail ballots and returning them to the supervisors of elections office. My understanding is that in recent legislatures, there's been discussions about making sure that there's not somebody who's going around and collecting a bunch of ballots, filling them out and bringing them in, that you're bringing actually a voter's ballot. If you're looking to your spouse or your child or a neighbor to help you because you have mobility issues and you have trouble with transportation, can somebody who is a close friend of yours take your ballot into the supervisor's office or to the polling place, or does it have to be you physically who bring your own ballot and nobody else?
Yeah, that's a great question. Family members can bring their entire family's ballots in. Okay, so that's pretty open, and that's codified in law. If you're a non-family member for an entire election, you're only allowed to have or bring two persons' ballots in. So if you have a neighbor that wants to help people vote, the most they can help with to actually deliver back to the elections office is 2 ballots during an election. There are concerns out there about harvesting or organized groups going door to door because people can get lists of who's requested a vote by mail ballot. And we don't want people going door to door and, in quotes, helping people fill out their ballot, but really they're marking the ballot. So, make sure it's somebody you trust, but a maximum of 2 ballots for a non-family member can be brought back to the elections office in an election cycle.
Good to know. Thank you for that. Hey, we're beginning to get close on time. I'll say if folks have a question about this election, they can press *3 to get in the queue. Door's not closed yet, but it's almost last call. I did want to come back to that poll that we did earlier. It was half of you who said that your plan is to vote by mail. So I'm glad that we have been talking about vote by mail rules and processes. It was about 20% of you, 19%, who were going to go do early voting, and then 31% who are planning to vote in person on Election Day at their polling place. And let me ask that question. So on Election Day, what time do polls open? What time do polls close? If you're coming in right at the deadline, are there things you need to know? How does that work for an Election Day voter?
Yeah, great question. The short answer to that is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. statewide on Election Day, which is November 5th. So 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is when the polls are open. If you are in line to vote by 7 p.m., you will be allowed to vote. For early voting, the early voting period is October 21st through either November 2nd or November 3rd. Some counties stay open for that last Sunday before the election. Those early voting site times vary by county. but they're usually pretty broad and extensive so that folks have a lot of opportunity. Early voting sites are definitely open during the weekends. I noticed that it's 19 to 20% of the respondents to the poll said they plan to vote on early voting. I would recommend, I think of Election Day as last chance voting. If you're going to vote Election Day, try and get out there, midday. Don't wait till the last minute. Don't wait till 6 o'clock or 6:30 to get out there, because every election I get calls from voters who are maybe in their car, desperately stuck in a traffic jam trying to get to the polls. If you're not in line by 7 p.m., we can't let you vote. So make sure that you get out there and either cast your vote by mail ballot in advance or take advantage of early voting, especially. That's in person, and we can handle lots of potential problems the voters might have. And that way you have a couple of days, really, to take care of any problems that might arise to make sure that your ballot gets counted.
That's really good advice. I appreciate especially the idea of thinking of voting on Election Day as last chance. Now, I know people who they always voted at the polling place on Election Day, and it's part of the American democratic experience, and so they do that. But really good point. You can do that at midday. You can do that a lot of times, depending on your community, you go mid-morning or mid-afternoon, and there's nobody there because you get rushes at the beginning and at the end of the day, or somebody who's running over during their lunch hour, let's say, if they work nearby. And you talked earlier, Mark, about how with the hurricanes, polling places may change. People need to check those. I assume that early voting is kind of in that same boat where from election to election, there can be some evolution of where the early voting sites are. So you really want to check before you get in the car to see where those sites are and what those hours are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In statute, it says we can't change early voting sites if it's really close to an election, except if there's an emergency like a hurricane or something like that. So if you're in an area that's not really been impacted, likely your early voting sites are the same as they've been over the years. But occasionally they do have to change from election to election. But certainly if you're in one of those heavily impacted areas, check with your Supervisor's of Elections office. Try and get out there to vote early in the early voting period, just so if there's something that unexpected comes up or there's some confusion or uncertainty as to where you're supposed to go, you can get that all ironed out before Election Day to make sure that you get that opportunity to vote. But certainly through the news media and in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office, and frankly the Governor's office and your local supervisor's office, there's going to be a lot of communications coming up over the next couple of weeks as we get closer to the election to make sure voters know how and when and where they can go to cast their ballots.
Thank you for that. And I know we've got maybe a couple of folks in the queue we may or may not get to. I want to tackle one other thing real quick, though, before we wrap up. The operation of an election it takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of work. So tell me a little bit about how are the people who you see at a polling place, are those folks volunteers? What kind of training is involved? Do you have enough people? Are you still recruiting volunteers or poll workers? How does that whole poll worker experience work for you?
Yes, it takes an army of folks to put on an election. Here in Leon County, I've only gotten about 22 full-time staff members. But during an election cycle, we have in my office, we essentially more than double that number. And then we've got our huge league of poll workers. They are paid, contrary to rumor. They are not volunteers. Frankly, we're not really allowed to use volunteers by statute. So we pay poll workers, and some of the positions get paid fairly well. The clerks, the folks that run each polling site, they are experienced hands. But everyone who works at a polling site or early voting site has to go through state-required training. It's at least several hours. Some of our clerks get trained for up to 6 hours before each election. A lot of that is somewhat book learning, where you're updating knowledge on changed statutes. But there's a lot of hands-on on how to operate our electronic poll books, which are how you sign in to vote, or how to operate the voting machines. The poll workers and clerks, they are heavily trained to make sure that they understand how to operate the equipment. The same goes for the ADA voting equipment and the audio interface and all of those opportunities for voters to vote. all of that is hands-on training, and it certainly has begun several weeks ago. Leon County, we've been doing our training because we have about 800 to 900 people that work the polls, and we don't want huge classes, so we break those up into very small classes so that we can have a lot of personal interaction with the poll workers so they can ask their questions and everyone is on the same page about how they need to operate and follow statute at the polling sites.
Nice. And it sounds like if you're listening to this and you think, oh, that sounds kind of interesting, might be too late for this election, but you're going to have another election again before you know it, and there'll be opportunities then.
Absolutely, yeah. We're always looking for poll workers. Most counties in Florida haven't had a huge problem getting poll workers. There's some isolated locations where that's been a problem. But in times of emergency, like right now, some of our poll workers may have been displaced. So it gets to be a little trickier. So there could be opportunities at in some of the counties that have been impacted heavily. They may need replacement poll workers because folks may have had to, leave the state or been displaced somewhere. So if you're in one of those counties, give them a call, and they may very much welcome your interest in trying to get you in there and working the polls for your community.
Great. Good tip. Thank you. And we've got time for one more question. It looks like Teresa is back in our queue. Teresa, you had another question.
Yes, I did. I'm in the area. I wasn't hit tragically like some of those near me, but have we put in place statewide anything to get out mobile trucks or vans that have computers, cables to these folks who are staying by their homes? They, can't leave. Libraries aren't there for them to go in and get on a computer and get out to them to give them a chance to try and register.
Yeah, Teresa, that's a great question. As far as registration, let me say the registration deadline in Florida is October 7th, so that's this coming Monday. If folks are not registered to vote in Florida, and I'm not talking about an address change or requesting a vote by mail, but if you're not registered, the deadline to get registered is October 7th. You can do that on your phone, frankly, through the online voter registration resources, and that's registertovoteflorida.gov, or you can go to leonvotes.gov/OVR for online voter registration, and that takes you to the state form. So if you're from a different county and listening, you can go to my website and leonvotes.gov/OVR, and you can get registered to vote in whatever county you're in. But as far as the mobile concept you're talking about, and I saw your question had asked about taking people to the polls or essentially bringing computerized resources into communities that have been heavily hit. I think that is essentially still being determined in this assessing phase, which I think most counties are in right now, in conjunction with the Secretary of State. So oftentimes the parties will go out and do outreach in communities to help people get registered or to provide some resources. But as far as getting people to the polls to vote in person, sometimes I also see either parties doing that, or I've seen that some of the transportation companies like Uber or Lyft, they oftentimes provide free rides to the polls. So that's really going to be on a county-by-county basis, and those opportunities, I think, will evolve as we get closer to the election and better assessments have been done. But again, pay attention, and if you have any questions, call your supervisor of elections at the local level there, and they can really communicate what the specific opportunities and any changes at their county-by-county basis. They can communicate that to the voters.
Great, and thanks, Teresa, for that question. Thanks to everybody who had questions and everybody who participated in the call today. On behalf of AARP Florida, especially want to thank you, Supervisor Earley, for giving us so much of your time at this very frenetic, busy time of year, and for being a part of this really important discussion and giving good information to AARP members about the 2024 election that's coming up November 5th. Are there any final comments, any final words you want to share with these folks?
Well, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to so many folks at one time. Really, communications is the essence of having a successful election, especially in a time like this with hurricanes. So just really to the voters out there and the folks listening in, contact your Supervisor of Elections office. Follow the trusted sources, whether that be the Secretary of State's office or your local county office, and just stay informed and really get out there and have your voice heard. We need you to vote, especially in times of crisis like this. Your voice is very, very important.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. And thanks to all of you for joining us on the line and participating in this Tele-Town Hall. We apologize if you had a question. I know there were a couple of folks who got dropped and we weren't able to get to them, but we encourage you to reach out directly, as Mark said, to the Secretary of State's office if you have questions about how to cast a ballot, or to your local Supervisor of Elections. You can do it in person or by mail. There's a voter assistance hotline that the state runs at 1-866-308-6739, and you can find out this and a lot of other valuable information about how to cast your ballot at aarp.org/flvote. And again, our hearts are with all of you who are still struggling to recover from Hurricane Helene. There is a lot of information at aarp.org/fl or aarp.org/fl disaster help in order to help you as you go down that path. We hope that this call has been an assistance and helpful to you, and we appreciate everyone's time and participation. Thank you, and have a great day. This is the end of our call.
Thank you.